Continuing now with The Final Days by Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. Still in the Part 1, Chapter 1. In the last session, we stopped at the point of, in Chapter 1, where Archibald Cox, the special prosecutor, Watergate special prosecutor, had subpoenaed recordings of 9 Nixon meetings and conversations, including the one of April 15th with John Dean. And Nixon had refused to provide tapes because of citing executive privilege. Cox took the matter to court, was upheld in the Court of Appeals. On October 20th, what they call the Saturday Night Massacre, Cox was fired by Nixon. Protests followed. Nixon reversed course, agreed on October 23rd to turn over the 9 tapes. So that's where we take up again. But then the problems mounted. Bizarre started a search for the tapes. 2 either were missing or had not been recorded on the automatic system. One of the 2 was of the April 15th meeting. The lawyers tried to find the exact explanation. The handling and accounting of the tapes they discovered was atrocious. Records had been kept on scraps of brown paper bags. Nixon, Haldeman, and Rosemary Woods, the president's secretary, had all checked out recordings at various times, but it was impossible to determine who had taken what and when. Bizarre went to Nixon and said that the April 15th dictabelt would have to be supplied. Technically, it was called for in the subpoenas, in the subpoena, just as the missing April 15th tape was. If they could supply at least the dictabelt, Sirica's suspicions and the public's might be diminished somewhat. But incredibly, Nixon sent word through Haig that he couldn't find the dictabelt. "Come on," Bizarre said to the general. "The president assured me there was a dictabelt. I didn't write that June 16th letter without checking with him very carefully." The search for the missing dictabelt had consumed the lawyers during the past few days. The president found what he said were his handwritten notes of the meeting, but there was still no dictabelt. Bizarre warned the president how bad it would look if the court was told that both the tape and the dictabelt for the same April 15th meeting were missing. The president's reply was chilling. "Why can't we make a new dictabelt?" Nixon was suggesting that the problem be solved by dictating a new recording from the handwritten notes. They would submit it to the court and attest that it was the original. By even suggesting that evidence be manufactured, the president had attempted to obstruct justice, Bizarre said. Judge Sirica had already been informed of the 2 missing tapes and was conducting an inquiry in open court. Bizarre would probably be the next witness called. Did Haig and Ziegler understand what he might have to testify to? The problem was fundamental, added Garment. The president's willingness to manufacture evidence showed how desperate he had become. It demonstrated that the president had neither respect for the law nor an understanding of it. Bizarre's testimony could establish what the president had denied for months, that it had been his intent all along to cover up, to conceal, to fabricate. To make matters worse, Bizarre said, the president was still insisting there was a dictabelt of that April 15th meeting. Nixon was personally continuing the search for it. Suppose he produced a dictabelt. There would be no assurance that he had not undertaken to dictate a new recording on his own. Admittedly, it was a terrible suspicion to entertain, but the president's actions had created it. Crucial evidence was missing, perhaps even destroyed. The lawyers couldn't trust their client. He had lied too many times before, witness his telling Bizarre that there was no automatic taping system. Maybe there had never been a dictabelt at all, and the president had been afraid of what Bizarre might hear in an actual recording of his meeting with Dean on the 15th. Garment defined the immediate difficulty in legal terms. All of them, the president, Haig, Ziegler, the lawyers, could be cited for obstruction of justice if they didn't handle this carefully. Nothing could be concealed from a legitimate inquiry. The lawyers had done all they could to defend the president. Now they had to protect themselves. What's the bottom line? Ziegler asked. Bizart and Garment drew it. They were recommending that the president resign his office. Haig and Ziegler were stunned. Moments passed. How can you come to such a conclusion? Ziegler said finally. The president had merely been thinking out loud when he suggested that a new dictabelt be made. It had not been done. They had all heard the president propose ideas which were ridiculous, outrageous, not courageous, ridiculous, outrageous. That was the way he made decisions, by dealing with all the alternatives. Resignation was absolutely out of the question, Ziegler declared. Haig's composure slipped. His face tightened. We don't even have a vice president, he said. Spiro T. Agnew had resigned the month before. House Minority Leader Gerald R. Ford had been nominated to succeed Agnew, but he had not yet been confirmed by Congress. Several disparaging comments followed about the prospect of House Speaker Carl Albert succeeding to the presidency. He was next in line until the vice presidency was filled, and he was a Democrat with a history of heavy drinking. Bizart and Garment explained that they were hardly recommending that the president resign immediately. He could step down after Ford was confirmed and sworn in. Haig still balked. What would be the impact in the country if the president resigned so soon after the vice president had been forced to resign? The two questions needed to be, quote, decoupled. Time was needed, but even time might not be enough. If the president resigned in a criminal haze, as Agnew had done, the effects on foreign policy would be disastrous. The loss of faith in the United States would be incalculable. There was the Middle East crisis to contend with. Another outbreak of war there could come at any moment. A president unschooled in foreign affairs, the thought went unfinished. And backing up here just a little bit, I want to note that they mentioned the Middle East crisis. Another outbreak of war there could come at any moment. So we're in November of 1973 here. Agnew had resigned in October. Well, also in October have been the Yom Kippur War. So the Middle East was in crisis, and that's what what they're referring to here. That another outbreak of war there could come at any moment because things still weren't settled. Haig and Bizart were caught in a trap of their own making. They had pushed hard for Ford's nomination over Nixon's first choice, ex-Governor John B. Connally of Texas. Connally, they had told the president, was too much a wheeler-dealer, involved in both the Democratic Party he had quit and the Republican Party he had just joined. His confirmation hearing would be a free-for-all, divisive and embarrassing. They had been persuasive, and also mentioned here of Connally, a reminder that Connally had been the Democratic governor of Texas in 1963 when he was sitting in the car with President and Mrs. Kennedy. He and Mrs. Connally were sitting in the car with President and Mrs. Kennedy, and Connally was injured in the assassination of Kennedy was very nearly an assassination of Connally as well as governor of Texas. And then in the early 70s, he had quit the Democratic Party, switched to the Republican Party, and he had been Nixon's Secretary of the Treasury at one point. So, again, Haig and Bizart had pushed hard for Ford's nomination over Connally, who was Nixon's first choice. They had been persuasive, and Nixon had sent Ford's name to the Hill. The president could not resist one final jab, however. He had sent Bizart one of the two pens he had used to sign the Ford nomination. It arrived with the message, quote, "Here's the damn pen I signed Jerry Ford's nomination with." Now they were saddled with him. Ford was not good enough to be president of the United States, Haig said. No one disagreed. Haig continued his recitation of the foreign policy disasters that would befall the nation under President Ford. "Do you know what could happen in the Middle East?" he asked again. Bizart and Garment turned the argument against Haig. The Middle East crisis was just another reason for the president to resign. Watergate had crippled his capacity to lead, Haig himself had admitted. The Middle East was yet another shark, they said. Haig paced the room, saying nothing for a while. There was no immediate solution, he concluded. Bizart persisted. One way or another, the president could not make it through his second term. In his best military jargon, the lawyer put it to the general in terms he could understand. Quote, "Everything after this is a damage-limiting operation." "We'll be happy to present the recommendation to the president ourselves," Garment said. Haig would have none of that. If anyone was going to see the president, it would be Haig. He knew that Nixon would reject the suggestion out of hand. He reminded them of the president's repeated statements that he would not resign. Nixon had said it as an oath, a solemn pledge. Haig had no stomach for scenes. No, it was out of the question. He would merely tell the president why the lawyers had come to Florida and why they wanted to see him. Was it really that bad, he asked Bizart and Garment. Perhaps they were tired. It had been a dreadful time for all of them. Fatigue was not the problem. "We are not saying that the president should go out and hang himself," Bizart said. They were merely attempting to show Nixon the reality of his situation. Haig continued to resist. In Key Biscayne, he didn't have the same access to the president as in Washington, he said. The president was not down the hall. He was half a mile away in his compound. He had flown down suddenly on Thursday to get some rest and to get away from his problems. The president wasn't ready to deal with this. There was the question of emotional health. There was the question of timing. It was premature. Garment became angry. Bizart and he had been out on the front lines, taking calls from reporters, enduring the snide comments in the halls of the executive office building, being humiliated almost daily in Judge Sirica's courtroom. The president's position was absurd. His explanations were not being bought by the judge, the special prosecutor, the public, or even the traditional Nixon supporters on the Hill, not to mention his lawyers. Someone had to appreciate how perilous the situation had become. Someone had to deliver the bad news and get through to the president. Ziegler became combative. The president was ill-served by such comments and conclusions, he said. The lawyers were turning against the president. It wasn't their job to judge these matters. Garment let it pass. He could never get a fix on how much Ziegler knew about Watergate. Bizart was sure that everything Garment and he said would be dutifully reported to the president by Ziegler in his own way. He was counting on Haig to find out the president's reaction to what Ziegler would secretly report to Nixon and to correct any false impression. The debate in the Key Biscayne villa continued into the next day. Finally, on Sunday, Haig carried the dismal message to the president, but Nixon was firm. He would not resign, nor would he see the lawyers. It was an awkward moment for Haig. He did not wish his own position to be misunderstood. He was merely conveying their judgment. He reassured the president that the lawyers were not doubting his innocence, only his chances to survive. The president said he was not sure of the future, what they might do to him, but he wasn't resigning. In spite of the pressure that was coming from all sides, things were closing in on him. Strangers would soon be listening to his private conversations, his telephone calls. The bureaucrats whom he loathed were studying his tax returns with an eye to finding something bad. They would. They always could. Beebe was being harassed, and so were his brothers. Garment, an old friend, had joined Bizart, a stranger to whom he had entrusted the future of his presidency, to tell him to quit. All this depressed him terribly, but he would never resign. Haig returned to the villa and delivered an abbreviated report. The president doesn't want to see you. That's the end of Chapter 1. We'll take up in the next session with Chapter 2 of Part 1, The Final Days, by Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. Thank you for watching.